What's up everybody? Today we are continuing our tutorial series A to Z in Reason Studios. Today we are covering the Redrum drum computer. The Redrum has some really cool features that you can use, and it's a great drum sequencer for getting your project started. So let's jump into Reason so we can check out the Redrum drum computer. So let's check out the track right now. So the Redrum is made up of these 10 sample banks that you can load samples into. Right at the very top of the Redrum is a mute, solo, and play button, and that allows you to audition the samples as they are laid out and as they are loaded into the Redrum. Right here to the left, we have our master level, which we can use to add and decrease the level. And down below, we have the patch name, as well as the options to load in different patches, either by using this folder here to browse for different Redrum patches, or by saving the patch. So you can actually save this patch, title it accordingly, How I Met Your Mother. Don't ask me why I named this track How I Met Your Mother. And then you can go to your folder and you will be able to load in those different drums accordingly because you have those patches already saved. So it's up to you how many sounds you have in each individual patch, but you can always save your patches. Now notice, if you have a sound that you actually edit, like if you click this button right here in the middle and hit edit sample, and you do anything to this sample, this now becomes a self-contained sample, and you won't be able to save this patch because there is a self-contained sample in it. So you have to actually get rid of that self-contained sample in order for you to be able to save the patch again. Of course, one thing that you can do is actually go to your sample folder. You drop this sample into the sequencer, export it as a loop. Go back to your Redrum, go to the folder that you exported that sound into. Now we can load that kick in, and now we can save this patch because we went through and exported this sample so that it wasn't a self-contained sample, and it was a sample that we can actually load in from our folder library. That's a very important step. If you're trying to save your Redrum patches and you aren't able to save your Redrum patches, you might need to just go ahead, drop that in your sequencer, export it, and then load it back into your Redrum, and now you have a sample that you can actually save into your Redrum drum computer. Speaking of loading samples, it's very simple, very easy to load a sample. If we start here with this Redrum completely empty, so if we start here with a very empty Redrum and we go into our browser, we can actually find sounds that we want, and we can simply just drag and we can drop them into the corresponding Redrum tracks. Or we could also click this folder, and now this orange bar appears, and it lets us know that we are actually searching for samples that we want to be put into this track right here. So once we find one that we want, we can just double click and it loads it in right away. And if we double click and choose a different one, it will replace that instead. So now we have that clap there, and we have this kick here. So that is an easy way to actually load in your samples. You can also cycle through the samples. If there are multiple samples in the folder, you can cycle through those samples by clicking up and down on these two arrows right here. Back in the original OG Reason days, when we were using the 14x2 mixer, it was very easy to create send and send effects, and they would be automatically mapped to the Redrum drum computer. So when you would load in a Redrum and you would load in a send effect, it would automatically route to that 14x2 when you apply the Redrum to that mixer. However, things are different now because we have a different mixer. So now we have send effects that are inside of our mixer, but we actually need to flip our rack around and do some routing in order for us to actually get the sends that we want to apply to our Redrum drum computer. So in other words, we could just make our own little send device that we wanted. We could just basically send out here to this reverb, and we can make another send out, let's say to this scream here, and we're going to send these out. And now these just need their own mixer channels. So we can just right click and create route to new mixer channels. And so now these drums can be sent to the reverb and the scream, and they will have their own send outs. So we can turn up this button here, the send one amount, and now we have that reverb coming through.
Hey, if you're enjoying this video right now, please do me a big favor and flip me a like. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Back to the video.
So here is our reverb and our scream. A very niche thing, but if you wanted to use the sends in that way, that's what you would need to do in order to use those sends. Now we also have a simple pan, which will allow us to pan these drum sounds left and right. As we pan them, we will get our pan left and right, and we have a level right here. So what's important is we have the drum level on the left and we have velocity on the right. So if you don't want any velocity changes, you simply need to turn this to where this light turns off. So that means there will be no velocity change to this kick. No matter how hard or soft you map them out in the Redrum, it will all just be the same value. It will all be the same value. Or you can turn your velocity up, and that will cause more velocity to be applied to these volume changes. So we can really hear the difference between these velocity changes. And we can also go the other way. And that does the same thing, except now our velocity is in reverse. So when we play our hard velocities, they actually will sound soft, and the softer velocities will sound loud. So a sweet spot would be right around here, right around maybe 33 or so, right where they kind of start you off. And if you want more velocity changes, but you want the typical velocity changes, then you just need to apply more velocity. Length is really good for, changing those transients of that kick, cutting that kick or that snare or whatever your sample is, making it just a little bit shorter. And a fun device you have here is this actual gate mode. So this decay or gate mode, if it's on, then you basically will get like a trail off. As you can see, it actually shows you right here. If we have the sample, and then there's a nice little trail off. There's a decay that is happening, or you can set it to this gate mode. And what that means is, so I'll load up a different sound here so you guys can see what I mean by that more specifically. So here we have this 808. If we have gate mode turned on and I go over to my sequencer while this gate mode is on, as you can see, as I click it, it's stopping like a gate is stopping it. As I hold it, it will actually play the longer length of that sample. So if I draw it out with an extended note such as this, and when the note inside of our clip is actually shortened, it will only play that much of the note. So that could be useful if you're going to do like multiple of these and you don't want them all to bleed into each other. Then you know that that gate is going to stop it exactly where it ends. All right, below that we have the pitch, so we can raise the pitch or we can lower the pitch. And one thing that I like to do with the pitch, I like to use like hi-hats for this pitch situation to show you guys that. So I'll load a hi-hat in right here. And then what I'll do is I'll just kind of play this pattern and create a hi-hat. And then we can automate this pitch here. And so that's how we can add some pitch changes to those hi-hats, and you can change your automation to go as much or as little as you want. All right, now we also have the tone. So kind of think of it like a filter. You can actually take out some of those highs when you turn your tone down, or you can apply more highs as you turn your tone up. And you can set a velocity to this as well. So that would mean that the higher notes will have more or less tone depending on how you set it. That's an easy way to apply some accents to your drums by using the tone and the velocity of the tone, and change up the velocity in your pattern, and that can also change up your accents on your notes. One thing I want to point out is that tone is not on all of the samples, but it is on the first, second, and 10th drum sample. And then also there is a pitch bend, which is here on the 6th and 7th sample, but they don't appear on the rest of the samples, as well as there is a start knob that appears, but they only appear on these other lanes. So you have 3, 4, 5, 8, and 9 for your starts. And what that means is as you play your drum, you can change when the trigger of the drum is set. So now we have a much shorter transient there, or we can start at the very beginning of that kick. So all of those tools can be useful and you can use them accordingly. I want to show you underneath this patch browser, there's a couple things here that we want to take a note of, which is high quality interpolation, as well as channel 8 and 9 exclusive. So what this means is that these two channels will cut themselves, but that's the only ones that will do it. So usually you would use this for like a hi-hat and an open hi-hat. You can click that on, and if we make a pattern here, so as you can see, 8 and 9, they cut themselves, they cut each other so that the sample stops once the other sample plays. So that's really important because that can help you in cases of those hi-hats, or if you can find another use for these two, 8 and 9, they can be played exclusively with each other in that way. High quality interpolation works like a high quality button. For some samples, it will make your sample sound better. For others, maybe not. So feel free to A/B test using that button on the Redrum, because if it doesn't help, it does use more computer power. So you can get some of that computer power back if it's not actually helping the sound of your drums. Okay, so now I want to get into this pattern section. So right here, you have this run button. When you click run, the sequencer will begin to play. And so depending on what you have selected, you can drop in where you want those samples to play. So if I want a simple 4 on the floor, I add in this kick drum here. And now we have that kick drum going. I can select my next drum lane and I can add a sample there for a clap, and I can place the clap on 5 and 13 to give us that traditional 4 on the floor with the clap in the middle. Let's add in this open hi-hat, and we'll place them in between on 3, 7, 11, and 15. So the different steps are numbered here at the bottom, and you can actually place them on these steps. You hit select, and then you draw in where you want them to be. And of course, you can change the velocity using this knob here to add your velocity. Either you want to play them hard, medium, or soft. It's set to medium by default. And that's totally up to you. Remember, you can also just turn your velocity off, and then that won't matter either way. It will just play as hard as the sample can play, depending on where your level is set. We now have this pattern. We can hit run. And what's cool about that is, of course, now you can copy this pattern and you can go to pattern 2 and you can paste this pattern. And something that you also can do is alter this pattern. So now you can alter that pattern. You can alter it as many times as you want. You can paste that pattern multiple times, and you can even randomize the pattern. You can paste the pattern, and you can shift the pattern left, shift the pattern right. You can shift all the notes to the left or all the notes to the right, totally up to you. And you have up to 8 patterns, and then you have banks. So now we have these patterns, and we can actually go to this bank and select pattern 1, and now we have a whole nother bank that we can set in different samples and different patterns of these tracks. Notice you have to actually make sure you choose the pattern that you want to play, but you have up to 4 different banks and 8 patterns on each bank. You can create as many of those patterns as can fit in the 8 pattern slots and the 4 different banks. You can also hit edit automation, and then you can select the pattern and loop and the bank that you want to choose from, and you can play that out throughout your track. But there's also another way that you can get this pattern into your sequencer, and that is by clicking right click and going to copy pattern to track. And then that will copy your pattern right here into a new note lane where you can actually see all of these notes. So this is the sequencer window for the Redrum. You can see the 10 channels that are available to you, and you can see the names of the drums. So you can actually use your pencil tool in the sequencer the same way you would in the piano roll and draw in the pattern for your drums with the drum sequencer, just using a new note lane as well. So you have a lot of flexibility with that, but I like using the sequencer. You can also adjust the amount of steps in each pattern as well. So a pattern with all 16 steps on will show the pattern loop through each of the 16 steps and then repeat. You can also have, less than 16 steps for some syncopation, and you can also add in more than 16 steps. So if you add in more than 16 steps, then you need to use this button here, which is Edit Steps Select. And when you use this Edit Steps button, now you can actually edit the steps above 16 steps. So rather than having a sequencer that just goes on and on and on, you can actually use the same buttons here, and you just switch between which steps you're actually editing. So here we on steps 1 through 16, so we can draw in those kicks, and then we could change the kicks on the next round, and then we can go back to the original one on this last set. And as I move up and down between edit steps, you can see that the steps are changing based upon what steps I have selected. So 1 through 16 and so on and so on and so forth to get all of the 64 steps that we have applied to this pattern. Notice it will also only be on that pattern. So if I switch to pattern 7, it now returns back to the original 16 steps. And I actually need to change this edit step select back to 1 through 16. So I can go ahead and edit these steps again. The resolution knob allows you to change the speed that the pattern is playing in. But if you want it, you can go slower than that. And now it will run slower than 1/16. Now it will go half of that speed. And it will play much slower. Or you can also speed it up, and now you have a much faster. But our tempo hasn't changed. Our tempo is still at 80, but it's actually playing it faster. And you can go up even faster. So sometimes if I want to play out a hi-hat pattern, I will use this resolution. I will actually go to a faster resolution, and then I will just draw in slower notes to get the same speed. So now we're going relatively slower, but I can speed that up. So now we're going really, really fast. And that allows me to add in these. But at that point, that's when I definitely want to have more steps. I want to have more steps so I can actually add in more of these notes. So I can have a very high resolution and a lot of steps, and then I can add these steps in. So by playing with the resolution, I can actually change the way that those hi-hats are being played, and I can play them a lot faster, have a different pattern, and just really, have a lot of fun. A simple shuffle knob here turns your pattern shuffle on, and this is being applied by your global shuffle. You go down here to our groove, and we can change the global shuffle amount here. So there's essentially no shuffle, 50% no shuffle. And as you add in the shuffle, you can change the amount of shuffle. Otherwise, this pattern shuffle button, it only has one set shuffle, and that's whatever your global shuffle is set to. Now, the last thing I want to look at is this Flam button here, because that's kind of cool. You can actually create those rolls as well with the Flam, but we need to change the amount of Flam. So now we change the amount of Flam and we can kind of create those rolls. And you can just play around with the Flam amount until you get the sound that you're looking for. You can have as much Flam or a little Flam. It delays when that second note comes in. And to turn the Flam on and off, there are these dots here at the top of your sequencer pads. And as you turn them on and off, it will activate and deactivate the Flam. And you can actually click this edit Flam button on, so that way when you draw in a note, it will automatically turn the Flam on and off. So we'll just turn that Flam on for you automatically. You can actually keep that off, and you can just turn it on manually here by clicking that button right there at the top. So these are some ways that you use your Redrum drum computer and start adding in samples. But once you've got your samples added in, how do we actually apply effects and compression to the sound? How do we, use the sound individually? What are some ways that we can actually use the Redrum in order to get a better mix, or in order to have more flexibility with the device? Let's check that out right now. Flipping the rack around, you actually have access to the back of the rack, and you have access to each of the 10 channels that represent the sounds that you have loaded into your Redrum drum computer. So when you flip the rack around, you actually can take this signal out and route it to a new mix channel. And I like to do that for all of the drum sounds that I'm using. I will route to a new mix channel. Sometime if I'm using the Redrum, I might only use a few of the drum sounds. I might not use all of the drum channels. I might only use a few of them. Sometimes I will use a different Redrum for each drum sound that I have. It just depends on what I'm trying to do that day. But that's some things that I like to do. So flipping the rack around, we do have some other things that we can do, because we have some CV and gate options that we can choose to use. So for example, we have this kick drum, and if we want it, we could drag this kick drum gate to the next gate over. And what that will do is every time this drum plays, it will play this one as well. The gate is triggering it. Also, you have this pitch CV, which means you can apply this to a modulator and it will modulate that pitch how you see fit, or you can change how you want that pitch CV in to change the pitch of that drum. So we have some mixing and routing that we can do here. Now that we have each of these channels with its own mix channel, we can actually do things like apply compression, we can apply reverb, we can apply different effects to these different instruments as we see fit. And then when you go over to your mixer, you now have all of your Redrum sounds. They have their own mix channels. And that helps for when you're going to do your mixing. It also helps to be able to apply any of the mixing and compression tools that you have available to you in your mixer, as well as when you go to bounce your mixer channels, you now have each of those Redrum channels where you can name them kick, snare, hi-hat, and you don't have to have them all coming out as like a loop with just the Redrum main outputs. You can break down each individual output, and you can be able to bounce your sections and your stems for your beat. You can be able to bounce your stems for your beat and have every individual sound go to its own track. The Redrum drum computer is an awesome instrument to get those drums right where you want them to be. Have your drum sequencer, everything that you need right inside of one nice package. And of course, anything that is a one shot or a sample, a loop, any kind of sample that you have can be loaded into the Redrum, and you can take advantage of the sequencer and pattern tool inside of the Redrum drum computer. It's really awesome. It's one of those instruments that I use in every single production. Well, if you guys have enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like on this video. Also, if you're looking for more tutorials like this, subscribe to the channel so that you can be updated when we drop more tutorials just like this one. And if you are looking for more tutorials right now, YouTube thinks that this will be a great video for you to watch next. But until next time, my name is Chris Reed. Peace.